Theories of International Relations. Part 1. Liberalism. Learning goals. Identify liberalism as a branch of the theory of international relations (IR). Introduce interdependence as liberalism's central concept. Discuss the role of regimes in the global governance framework in the international arena. Apply the principles of liberalism to the analysis of the causes and consequences of World War I. Learning results by the end of this topic. Defining and explaining key terms and concepts relating to liberalism. Define the role of regimes in the current global governance structure. Analysis of the impact of the First World War on liberalism's development. Let's start with the brief summary of the topic. Liberalism is one of IR's oldest theoretical schools, which focuses on how best to create an equitable and more peaceful international order. Liberalism's core principle is interdependence, a condition in which two or more international actors rely on each other for essential goods or services to be provided. Liberals believe that interdependence reduces conflict by promoting a harmony of interests, common values that can be accomplished by cooperation. Liberals see regimes in what is essentially an anarchic international system as the most important source of order. International organizations support the most effective regimes that ensure absolute gains for all their members. Liberals believe domestic political structures are a significant indicator of the international behavior of states, claiming that liberal democratic states do not tend to go to war with other liberal democracies. This is called the democratic peace theory (DPT). Therefore, the spread of liberal democracy is an effective way of widening the international zone of peace inhabited by the democratic states of the world. Liberals have successfully built a wide range of international regimes that deal with security, economic and social development, decolonization, international law and a variety of other issues. Most of these regimes operate through the institutions of the United Nations, which is actually the world's most powerful instrument of global governance. The First World War produced the first generation of liberal thinkers in IR, the idealists. Such theorists wanted to build a world based on the rule of law and collective security in which states would resolve conflicts rather than war through the League of Nations. The Second World War forced many liberals to acknowledge the special role of great powers in creating and maintaining regimes, a lesson they put into practice while designing the Security Council of the United Nations. Introduction. Liberalism is a powerful IR philosophy that highlights a set of questions distinct from those covered by the English school. Like John Locke, liberals believe that justice must define any form of international order if it is to survive. Unjust orders are, they argue, inherently unstable because the people they oppress invite rebellion. As such, liberal ideology is also prescriptive, proposing concrete policy measures in pursuit of its objective of a just world order worldwide. The English school, on the other hand, appears to be analytical, analyzing various international societies' structure and composition without necessarily asking which type of society is better. Their attitudes toward war clearly illustrate the difference. Whereas in some international cultures the English school accepts that war may be a legitimate form of conflict resolution. Liberalism considers military dispute as evidence of failure. For liberals, war is evil to avoid whenever possible. This makes liberalism a normative philosophy, concerned with what should be rather than simply describing what is. It is important to note that social sciences, i.e., political science, economics, sociology, and so on, have many varieties of liberal theory. Such varieties of liberalism are not identical though connected by their intellectual history. Economic liberalism, which advocates a reduction in government control and the reliance on market forces to decide economic outcomes, is not the same as liberal institutionalism, the most prominent type of liberal thought in IR. Organizing principle of liberalism. With its intellectual origins in the European Enlightenment of the 18th century, liberalism focuses on ways in which interdependence of states would contribute to greater cooperation and thereby ensure international peace and security. Interdependence is closely related to globalization. It defines a situation in which for essential goods or services two state or non-state actors depend on each other. It limits the autonomy of the actors, requiring them to recognize the effect of their actions on others. Interdependence, according to liberalism, makes actors less likely to participate in violent confrontation as it provides a harmony of interests that promotes cooperation between international actors and makes competition and confrontation less possible. Liberalism in this sense owes a debt to the idealism that characterized much of the IR philosophy between the two world wars. Like the English school, the liberals see the international arena as one defined by anarchy, the absence of a final judge to arbitrate disputes and enforce laws. Liberals have no respect for informal institutions, as compared to the English school. They prefer formal agreements and treaties to unwritten understandings since they represent written social contracts that all contracting parties can clearly understand and monitor. Many of these liberal concepts are deeply questioned by other IR theories, particularly those labeled by their followers as realist. Summary of organizing principle. Liberalism is one of IR's oldest theoretical schools, which focuses on how best to establish a just and stable international order. Liberalism's guiding principle is interdependence, a condition in which two or more international actors rely on each other for essential goods or services to be established. Liberals believe that interdependence eliminates tension by promoting harmony of interests, shared values that can be accomplished by cooperation. Concepts and assumptions. Liberals argue that interdependence is between international actors, relies on others to provide essential goods and services, from food security to investment. Liberals refer to this interdependence as they prescribe policies to reduce disputes and create a just order in our anarchic world. Liberals argue that regimes have the just form of order. Regimes are problem-solving instruments that promote the pursuit of collective action by international actors to solve shared problems. They do this by codifying the rights and duties of actors in a sequence of treaties, agreements, and charters. Unlike English school institutions, liberal regimes are actively structured to deal with particular issues. Liberals argue that the English school's informal institutions can't have a sustainable foundation for international cooperation. For institutions to be successful, they have to be codified into international law. Consequently, liberalism sees international institutions, the organizational embodiments of regimes, as the best means of maintaining stable international relations. Liberalism's confidence in regimes is based on its presumption of an international harmony of interests as the only way to ensure world peace and stability. The harmony of interests suggests that the interests of all international actors are fundamentally identical, if rationally determined. Thus, through collective action, they will achieve absolute gains, pooling their resources in pursuit of shared objectives. Liberals believe that international organizations (IOS) such as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization (NATO) and the North American Free Trade Agreement (NAFTA) are the certain means through which actors can make absolute gains by making both state and non-state actors secure and prosperous. Because no one is a loser, the order created by pursuing absolute gains is regarded as just and secure, following John Locke's ideas. It is somewhat different from the relative gains followed by other theoretical schools, in which international units aim to improve themselves at the expense of one another. Liberalism in Iris, a relatively new variation on the liberal philosophical tradition which only emerged during the late 20th century as a coherent approach to the study of international politics and economics. It accepts many of the guiding principles of classical liberalism. It assumes, for instance, that peace is best accomplished by liberating humanity from authoritarian rule through democratic policies. Liberals argue that liberal democratic states appear to be less warlike than their counterparts, both authoritarian and theocratic. This is particularly true in terms of their ties with other liberal democracies. The views of liberalism on the relation between domestic government and international behavior have contributed to the theory of democratic peace. The core argument of the democratic peace theory is that liberal democracies do not go to war with each other, despite fighting against non-liberal or undemocratic states. Democratic peace theory argues that a truly democratic world should be a peaceful one where disputes are resolved by diplomatic negotiation rather than military action. Therefore, where democratic and non-democratic states clash, the most likely flashpoints for international conflict do exist. This has guided liberals around the world to call for the creation of social democratic domestic governments. Nevertheless, the democratic peace theory remains an important point in the toolkit of liberalism. Liberalism is a prescriptive philosophy that promotes the development of conditions for international peace through the establishment of regimes to solve shared problems in the otherwise anarchic international arena. This recognizes a broad variety of international IR actors, from states to TNCs and non-governmental organizations. The theory argues that interdependence is the best way to protect IR against conflict, particularly when reinforced by a structured set of rules and organizations that can solve shared problems and achieve absolute gains for each of the actors involved. Regimes bring order to what liberals consider as an increasingly anarchic international system by maintaining the rule of law and thus solving the problems of international collaboration and cooperation. Summary of concept and assumption. Liberals see regimes in what is essentially an anarchic international system as the most important source of order. International organizations support the most effective regimes which guarantee absolute gains for all their members. Liberals believe domestic political structures are an essential indicator of the international behavior of states, believing that liberal democratic states do not want to go to war with other liberal democracies. This is called a democratic peace theory (DPT). Therefore, the expansion of liberal democracy is an effective means of broadening the international zone of peace inhabited by the democratic states of the world. Liberalism and the First World War. There is a strong argument for making liberalism a product of World War I. Before 1914, European and global society was dominated by institutions that fostered internal rivalry and possibly even conflict. These included militarism, the belief that political disputes could be resolved by using force against one's competitors, and nationalism, the belief that the world is divided into separate identity groups that define themselves as opposed to each other. These institutions, along with the norms, rules, and practices associated with the Westphalian international society, helped to drive the world into a state of war in 1914. The resulting chaos indicated an epochal change in foreign relations. It led to the creation of the first academic positions devoted to studying international relations. This has led writers identified liberalism with the dominant school of IR between 1919 and 1939, which they calls idealism. This early form of liberalism called for the creation of an international rule of law similar to that which exists in the domestic jurisdictions of the states. Idealists argued, would address the security problems associated with world anarchy and lay the foundations for international peace. Liberalism established the League of Nations in their attempts to establish a world in which international law could restrict violent behavior among states. This collective security organization sought to represent the harmony of interests of liberalism by asking states to view an attack on any of their numbers as an attack on them all, as Alexander Dumas stated, all for one and one for all. The League of Nations was trying to make war obsolete by ensuring that any offender would be overwhelmed by uniting international society. Though unsuccessful in the fact of Japanese, Italian and German aggression in the 1930s, the international idea of collective security in the form of the United Nations would re-emerge from the ashes of World War II. Many authors, including a number of liberals, explain the League of Nations' inability to use their power to implement the post-1918 settlement by pointing out the unwillingness of great powers. This has led some liberals to support the theory of hegemonic stability, the notion that an international system is most stable when supported by one or more states that are both willing and able to reward supporters and punish opponents of the international order. Hegemonic stability helps explain the veto powers given to the permanent P5 members of the Security Council to ensure their active involvement in the UN collective security framework. Liberalism describes the First World War as a failure of the international pre-war society to establish clear disincentives about a state's use of force in pursuit of its political objectives. This argument has led to repeated attempts to build regimes that would prosecute international peace and security violators. It also encouraged liberals to call for stronger interdependence among states as a way of promoting cooperation by rewarding good behavior. Several of those efforts to build a peaceful world have been more successful than others, but they can still trace their origins to the earliest versions of democracy arising from the First World War. Summary of Liberalism and the First World War. The First World War brought the first wave of liberal thinkers to existence in the idealists. Those thinkers hoped to establish a world based on the rule of law and collective security in which states would settle disputes rather than war through the League of Nations. The Second World War compelled many liberals to recognize the special role of great powers in creating and maintaining regimes, a lesson they put into action while creating the Security Council of the United Nations. Conclusion of the topic. Liberalism focuses on the concepts of interdependence and regimes. The former describes the fact that state and non-state actors globally depend on each other to provide essential goods and services. Such interdependence ensures that a large number of international actors would usually need a cooperative approach to any potential solutions to international problems. Liberals argue that in an anarchic international society, cooperation requires a structured collection of international agreements setting out the rights and responsibilities of the actors and setting up an administrative structure to ensure effective coordination. The aim of these regimes and their associated international organizations is an outcome that guarantees the continued autonomy of international actors while maximizing their chances of addressing thorny global issues successfully. Next topic: realism. Thanks for watching.